We on? All right, very good. Good morning. We'll be on lesson 8 in Job, and I think we're at about Job 12, give or take. Probably doesn't matter because, if we repeat, that's fine. And we are skipping a couple of verses in Job because of the length and the repetitive nature of a lot of the arguments. And so I would encourage you to go ahead and read Job on your own because there's a lot there of interest. But which reminds me of a couple things. I'll go ahead and ask the trivia question. We're blinking? Yeah. Am I still talking? Yeah? Okay. Well, okay. Give a second for technical difficulties. I haven't messed with anything. Do you want to try that? No, it's on. It's on. Technical difficulty, but yeah. Johnny to the rescue will rescue us. Very good, technology-wise. Other than that, we'll rely on God. All right, so today's, there are two trivia questions again, because one's unfair and one's fair. And the fair one is, name 3 of the spies that were sent into the land of Canaan when the Israelites were about to be given the land of Canaan by God. And you know that they failed 10-2. So name 3. And then the unfair one is, last week we asked what other book was Job mentioned in. Did I say the New Testament? Okay, good. Because that was the right question. This week's unfair question is, what other book than the book of Job in the Old Testament is Job mentioned? Because all that's evidence that Job really existed, which I believe, but some people don't. Some people think it's fancy, a fancy allegory or even a parable, which reminds me of a third. I guess we could go with the third trivia question, which is semi-fair, somewhere in between. And that is, of all the parables of Jesus, how many mentioned someone by name? Most all of them, if you think about it, were like the Samaritan went out. But how many named someone? So anyway, we'll probably spend all our time on trivia. Yes? One, yes, and that was absolutely Lazarus, and being in the bosom and seeing across the divide and all that. So that was the only parable of Jesus that mentioned the individual in the parable by name, which makes some people think it's an actual story, not a parable, but is a parable, I believe, the way Jesus told it. So that's the answer to the middle one. So then we have the fair and the unfair. Who's got an answer for us? Name 3 of the spies. You can name 2 right now, right? Joshua and Caleb. Name 1 other. You got to name a loser, because the other 10. What? Oh, it was close. Aminadab. Yeah, it's got some letters that some of the others have. Yeah, so that's good. That's the joy of having only 26 letters in the alphabet, is if you give a name with like 9 of them, you're probably going to hit at least 1 or 2. So I'll go ahead and answer that one while you're answering the what book in the Old Testament other than Job is Job mentioned in. And so Numbers 13 is where we find the spies. Always kind of like to look at Numbers because, Numbers scares people. If you start reading through the Bible chronologically, or not chronologically, well, either way, but if you do your 1-year Bible reading, people generally hit Leviticus and sort of slam on the brakes, and then when they hit Numbers, they turn off the ignition, and they never get any further. Because, you start reading, and from the tribe of Reuben, God counted all the fighting men, and the fighting men were 63,772 or whatever. And so it gets a little dull, but there's a lot in Numbers that you don't get to because it's not all about counting people. And Numbers 13, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. These were the leaders at this time. From the tribe of Reuben, Shammua, son of Zachar, not the orca whale, but leader of Reuben. From the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb. We know that one. From the tribe of Issachar, Igal. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, son of Nun. Talk about that in a second. That's Joshua. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel. From the tribe of Manasseh, a tribe of Joseph, Gadi. So there's Gadiel and Gadi. That always, if you have 12 people, you always got two with the name that could be confused, right? It always happens. When I was in 7th grade, I went to a little Lubbock Christian school. 7th grade, it's a lot like Dallas Christian, but without any money. And so we had like 24 people in my class, and 12 were male. It was an even split. And 4 were named Greg, and 4 were named Barry. There was only one Norm, which may shock you, but I always thought that was amazing that 8 of 12 had just 2 names, and it's kind of got off topic. All right, so then the from the tribe of Dan, Amiel. That one's real close to Amminadab. And then from the tribe of Asher, Sether. And from the tribe of Naphtali, Nabi. From the tribe of Gad, Gul. And so I assume he was the scary one probably. But so those 10 failed. And then, of course, Caleb and Joshua said, we can do this. But here's a little parenthetical statement, which is interesting. At verse 16, these are the names of the men Moses gave to explore the land. Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. So Hoshea is actually the closer alliterative sound to that of a Hebrew name, the Hebrew name Joshua or Hoshea. And Hoshea means victorious, as I recall, or excuse me, not victorious, salvation, give salvation. And then Joshua technically means the Lord saves. So it really means the same thing. But it is interesting that he gave him that name. And I think the reason it's mentioned there that he gave him that name was that it's foreshadowing of how significant Joshua would be with God saves the people. And so that's like a predictive text to tell us how significant he would become over time to God's people. And of course, if you look at the name Hoshea, Joshua in Hebrew, the Greek equivalent is Jesus, which means the Lord saves. And so really that was the same name. And we talk about that from time to time. Here, I'll go and get the store. But certainly in recent memory, the name Joshua has been a very popular American name. And I would suggest that the name Jesus still is not a very popular American name to name a boy, name a child at birth. But of course, in other cultures, it's relatively common to do so. So then who has the answer to what other book? Yes? Yes, it was. You knew that because who else is mentioned there? Well, Daniel, because you're Daniel, absolutely. So Ezekiel 14:14 and 20. Turn to 14:14. Ezekiel. You were born to know this answer. Ezekiel 14:14 reads, and I'll start at 12, of course. The word of the Lord came to me, son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply, and send famine upon it, and kill its men and their animals, even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they could save only themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. And then down at verse 19, if I send a plague to that land and pour out my wrath upon it through bloodshed, killing its men and their animals, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could save neither son nor daughter. They would save only themselves by their righteousness. So these 3, Noah, Job, and Daniel, were mentioned twice here in the same passage in Ezekiel. So I wanted to mention, and Keith isn't here this morning, but about 3 weeks ago, I think, Keith asked, because Ezekiel and Daniel were contemporaries in captivity in Babylon, if there was mention that they knew one another, because they both were given visions from God at the same time in the same area. Daniel and his friends were taken into captivity about 8 years before Ezekiel was, but that's close enough that they probably were there at the same time. I think Daniel survived in captivity quite a number of years. And so my answer was no, there was no reference to him. And that's still the answer despite reading in Ezekiel, because the Daniel here does not appear to be the Daniel of fame with Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel in the statue, because it's a different spelling of Daniel in Hebrew, but in English it's the same spelling of Daniel. And so that was probably a Daniel of renown, spiritual renown that we just don't know much. We don't know anything about. And then, of course, we know about Noah and Job. And so when Ezekiel wrote this, he wasn't writing about the guy who's also ministering at the same time, because that presumably wouldn't be somebody of lore to the Hebrews if they, lived at the same time. So the answer still is I don't know of any reference between Ezekiel and Daniel that they knew one another directly. But this is a different Daniel by all of the context. But I do think it's very interesting that if you look at Job being mentioned both Old and New Testament by different authors, by James and by Ezekiel, I think it lends the credibility to the issue that I think Job was absolutely a person just like we read about with all his debates with his friends and everything. And that is a point of debate. A lot of people do think it's essentially a parable about suffering and righteousness, mainly because we can't really place when he lived or where he's from directly, because we don't know the land of Uz well, and Job of Uz. And then he wasn't a Hebrew. So I would suggest, though, Noah was not a Hebrew. Noah was a patriarch, and a patriarch following after God. And then after Abraham, which was after Noah, was when the nation became the land, or the nation of the Israelites. Abraham's grandson Jacob became Israel by God naming him that. And then they became known as Hebrews after Eber and the language that developed in that time. Eber sounded like Hebrew, and that's why, because it came from that. So there were no Hebrews in the time of Noah. There were no Hebrews in the time of Adam, for instance. And I think there were no Hebrews in the time of Job. So Job wasn't Hebrew, but he was one of those who knew about God. The other main ones that we know about who were patriarchal in their position or priestly in their position are Melchizedek, the priest of Salem, didn't seem to be the same lineage as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And then Jethro of Midian, which was a title probably, Jethro being the title, Reuel being the name. The father of Zipporah that Moses ran across in the land of Midian, taught Moses a lot about the nature of God because he was the priest of Midian, but he wasn't anything of lineage with Abraham either. So does that make sense? Okay, I think we answered all three trivia questions. So let's go to Job. I did want to make sure, I'd like to clarify that Daniel comment with Al-Catch Keith, who had asked that, and make sure clarify that too. So I think we were around Job 12. Honestly, I can't remember. Anybody remember where we were last week?
You did talk about skipping some of Zophar because it was repetitive.
It's very similar. Yeah. So we did that. So we at least skipped it. So we must be at 12. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to a few verses that I think are critical. And again, I'd encourage you to go and read it. I did read something interesting this week, that there are two secular poets, and unfortunately I can't remember who they were, but they're not, they were like 18th century poets. And they made the comment from their study of the Bible that if all the world's poetry was gone except for Job, that they would still feel like it was a wonderful piece of poetry in the world. One made that comment. The other one made the comment that if all the books of the Bible were lost except for Job, we would still have the best example of poetry over history. And so I think it's interesting to hear that context because I don't think of Job as poetry in particular. But yet, almost all the book is in verse, meter and verse style. It's just not, some people think of poetry just as rhyming and having the same metric to it. And of course, poetry can be free form, verse after verse, but a lot of repetitive nature ends up with poetry. And this is apparently viewed as one of the greatest poetic books around ever by some. And I think that's pretty interesting because I don't think we read it the same in modern English as they would with Hebrew, for instance, or even older style English probably. But let's look at a few of the key verses. And one is, Job 12:1 then. Job replied to this comment. So briefly, his three friends said, in order, hey, you must have sin, you got to address. The second one said, your life is sin, you just got to address it. And the third is, hey, everything you do has sin behind it, so you got to clear that up with God. So it's your fault you're suffering. Job kept steadfastly saying, I believe I have not taken my focus off God. I am suffering. I'm miserable. I hate it. I wish I hadn't been born. I wish I'd die. God must have left me. You also said, like, God pays more attention to sinners than to the righteous. And that's in the early part of 12. So that must be where we wrapped up last week. And then, but he kept standing by the issue that he had done what he could to have a relationship with God, and yet he was suffering. And his friends kept saying, no, there's got to be something wrong with you. That's important as we get to the passage on Elihu coming up. But let's go ahead and look at verse 2. Doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have a mind as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things? So what he's saying is, despite what my friends keep telling me about suffering and how I'm in the wrong, he's saying, hey, I can think too. And I don't think so. I don't think that I've been in sin. I think I just, I'm not inferior to you. He's talking to his friends. He's not talking to God there. He's saying, I'm not inferior to you, so who does not know all these things you've been saying? So I've become a laughingstock to my friends, though I called upon God, and he answered, a mere laughingstock, though righteous and blameless. Men at ease have contempt for misfortune and the fate of those whose feet are slipping. The tents of marauders are undisturbed, and those who provoke God are secure, those who carry their God in their hands. So he's saying even the godless and the idolaters of the world seem to have more blessing than him. Yeah, this is still in his misery phase of complaint against God. But ask the animals, and they'll teach you, or the birds of the air, and they'll tell you, to speak to the earth, and it'll teach you, or let fish of the sea inform you, which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature, and the breath of all mankind. Does not the ear test words, and the tongue taste food? Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? To God belong wisdom and power, counsel and understanding are his. What he tears down can't be rebuilt. The man he imprisons cannot be released. If he holds back the waters, there's drought. If he lets them loose, they devastate the land. To him belongs strength and victory. Both deceived and deceiver are his. He leads counselors away stripped. He makes fools of judges. He takes off the shackles put on by kings, and he ties a loincloth around their waists. Or a blindfold is another possible translation there. Puts a blindfold on them. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows men long established. He silences the lips of trusted advisors and takes away the discernment of elders. He pours contempt on nobles, disarms the mighty. He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings deep shadows into the light. He makes nations great, destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of all their reason. He sends them wandering through a trackless waste. They grope in darkness with no light, and he makes them stagger like drunkards. And so I wanted to read that chapter the way we look at, because what he's saying is essentially, hey, I'm on equal ground with you. We all know that God's got plans that we can't necessarily all figure out. but I'm not inferior to you where I have to hear all these insults about how sinful I've been. And then he goes on to say, God's in charge of everything that happens in nature, and that God's at least aware of, if not in charge of, everything that happens that's a negative to nations, like drought, and like the king having strength and then having it taken away, or like the judge thinking he's making the right judgment when really it's God's judgment that matters. And so he's still in that, again, kind of complaint phase of everything that's happening is God doing it, but it's not because I have sinned and caused God to do it. So again, all that plays a role in his debate with his friends about this predicament he's in. And then just go back a couple of verses, a few chapters. Job 5:14, darkness comes upon them in the daytime, at noon they grope as in the night. This is when, which one was that? That was Eliphaz making the argument to Job about his sin. And then Job answers that essentially in chapter 12, verse 25. He says, they grope in darkness with no light, and he makes them stagger like drunkards. So he's saying, rather than people groping around the darkness and being like drunkards, it's God bringing about the predicament that they're in. So, does that all make sense? Any questions, comments? Anybody got the solution of Job? That'd be great. Anything? Okay. Chapter 13, verse 1. My eyes have seen all this. My ears have heard it and understood it. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you. Same thing. He's saying to his friends. He's not talking to God here. He's saying, hey, we all can figure this out. And I don't really need you insulting me or accusing me to get through this. So he's kind of like tired of his friends talking, if you will. So you, however, smear me with lies. You're worthless physicians. What? Worthless physicians? We got to work on that translation there. Now, what he's saying there is actually really, let me finish reading. I didn't quite read. This is really interesting to me, at least. So, you, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent, for you, that would be wisdom. So, he's essentially saying, again, he's tired of hearing his friends. And what he's basically saying here about worthless physicians is you're like quacks. You're like the quack who says, hey, all you got to do is, take this and you'd be fine, without realizing the whole situation, the whole big picture. And of course, we, that could happen with any group of professionals or any group of advisors. But I think it's interesting they mention physicians. It's kind of like the woman who went to Jesus with her 12 years of bleeding and says she had spent everything she had on doctors. And I thought, where's she when I need her? Yeah. I mean, excuse me. No, that's not what I think. I think it's interesting. Interesting that that comment was made. She had spent everything on doctors. All right, so so he asks them to be silent so that he can speak. And let's go down then to verse 20. Actually, 17. Let's do 17. Listen carefully to my words. Let your ears take in what I say. So he's saying, now you've talked to me like crazy. Let me say something. Now that I've prepared my case, I know I will be vindicated. So he feels like he has presented himself before his friends and before God as, this isn't due to my sin that I'm suffering. And of course we know it was due to Satan coming and saying, hey, Job's got a hedge around him. He won't be righteous if we take that away. And God said, well, do to him as you please, and we'll see, except don't kill him. And so it wasn't sin that brought all this on. It was like a challenge from Satan. So he prepares case. He knows he'll be vindicated. Can anyone bring charges against me? If so, I will be silent and die. So he's essentially saying, everything you've said to accuse me is just not true. Only grant me these two things, O God, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand far from me, and stop frightening me with your terrors. Then summon me, and I'll answer, or let me speak, and you reply. How many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offense and sin. Why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? Will you torment a wind-blown leaf? Will you chase after dry chaff? For you write down bitter things against me and make me inherit the sins of my youth. You fasten my feet in shackles. You keep close watch on all my paths by putting marks on the soles of my feet. So man wastes away like something rotten, like a garment eaten by moths. So essentially, when Job is trying to talk to God here and says, "Hey, give me two things," the first is this: withdraw your hand, and then the second really is show me my offense and my sin. Down at verse 23, and so he's essentially saying, "In my suffering." And show me if indeed I did do something wrong. Show it to me, instead of just being like an observer of my suffering. And I think it's really interesting to read that where he says, "Hey, speak to me." Then let's see, verse 22, after he says, "Withdraw your hand," he says, "Summon me and I'll answer, or let me speak and you reply," because that's exactly what's going to end up at the end of all these arguments in Job, is that God's going to say, "Hey, I'm in charge. You are subject to whatever you're subject to under my control, but I am in control." And he goes on to, I think it's something like 84 questions he asked Job, and the answer to all of them is only God can do that. Job doesn't answer them that way because it's just God's soliloquy essentially, but that's the ultimate answer. So, anybody else have any thoughts along those lines?
I like the thought of letting you tracking by the mark on feet.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? What? Yeah, he knows. He knows what's going on. What's that? So let's talk about that. That's a good one, a good segue. You keep close watch on my paths, verse 27. Then let's go down to 14. 14. If a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait for my renewal to come. You will call and I will answer you. You will long for the creature your hands have made. Surely then you will count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. So that is pretty interesting. God keeps track of us, but not for the sake of keeping track of sin. Even, as he was mentioning the sins of his youth, at 13:26, you write down bitter things against me and make me inherit the sins of my youth. I think what he really was, what Job was contemplating, I believe, is that maybe this was something he had done many years back, but that maybe his friends wouldn't even know, so why would they accuse him of that? And why would God keep that written down, bitterness against him? And then as he's starting to shift his mentality toward God, he says at, again, 14:15, you will call and I'll answer you. And then 16, you will count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. So it's like he talks himself out of that idea that God was still accusing him for something he had done as a youth. And I think, most people, I'm sure, are pretty happy to be forgiven of things. I think that most people have more trouble forgiving themselves for something that's been done in the past than God has trouble forgiving us, because I think God does wipe the slate clean with the blood of Christ. And I think it's really hard for humans to realize that sometimes, often, in fact. So let's look at a little more of the shift of Job here in the middle of all of his arguments. We'll go to verse 22, 14:22. He feels but the pain of his own body and mourns only for himself. So Job was starting to realize, instead of saying, "Hey, I wish I hadn't been born, I wish I died, you don't care, God, you just put me out of my misery." Now he's starting to shift to, "Hey, maybe I'm only mourning for myself. Maybe I'm not realizing the bigger picture of God's will." And I think that's an important determination there, because any of us, as we have any physical suffering, I think ultimately need to realize the bigger picture is, heaven's coming. Christ went through all the misery imaginable to die for us, and his blood sufficient to cover all sin. And we don't need to mourn for ourselves. We need to mourn over sin to the point where we then want to get rid of that sin in our life and turn it over to God and be washed free of that in our death, burial, and resurrection of baptism, and then be a new creature, not bound by the old, issues of pride, lack of forgiveness, sin, unrighteousness, but to pursue the righteousness in God. Only our perfection only comes through Christ, through the blood of Christ, but we are told be perfect as Christ was perfect. And I think that emphasizes be dead to yourself and alive in Christ. So, appreciate that. Was that clapping or was that anger? Anyway, those are simply the words of Christ that I think are very important for us. So then Eliphaz jumped back in. Now, I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to go to the key verses. So let's go 15, 14. What is man that he could be pure, or one born of a woman that he could be righteous? So what he's saying is, hey, you may claim you don't have sin causing all this. I've made the argument this has to be sin causing all this. And how could a man be blameless? And it's a fair argument. We know that nobody is without sin. And Job was saying he did have sin, but from his youth, not from current cause of this. And so, what is man that he could be pure, or one born of a woman that he could be righteous? If God places no trust in his holy ones, if even the heavens are not pure in his eyes, how much less man, who is vile and corrupt, who drinks up evil like water? Listen to me, I'll explain to you. Let me tell you what I've seen. What wise men have declared, hiding nothing received from their fathers, to whom alone the land was given when no alien passed among them. All the days of the wicked man suffers torment, the ruthless through all the years stored up for him. Terrifying sounds fill his ears. When all seems well, marauders attack him, and he goes through all this misery. And then down to verse 33, they conceive trouble, give birth to evil, their womb fashions deceit. So, just to say, what Eliphaz is essentially re-injecting into the discussion is, you can claim that you have a good relationship with God all you want, but there must be sin causing this. And so, same argument, same discussion. And then chapter 16, Job replied, I've heard many things like these. Miserable comforters are you all. I like that statement. You are a miserable comforter. I think that's fascinating. He was getting really, really worn out on his friends, And it is interesting because for a lot of my life, the way we usually study Job is to talk about the story at the start of the kids dying and the livestock being carried off, and then Job getting the sores and his wife saying, curse God and die, and then friends come and help him through it, and then Job is suddenly blessed by God. And what really happened, as we're reading, is that Job's friends tried to accuse him of being guilty, and Job to say, hey, I've got my eyes on God. I don't understand it yet. And then he sort of moves to, I'm starting to understand it. Soon he'll be hearing God reply to him, and he will understand it all. But he got so worn out on his friends because his friends didn't really get him through it. His friends made accusations against him. And I think that's very different than, than the way I was taught about Job, at least for many years of my life. And of course, it's much simpler. I mean, if you're in the ninth grade, you're not going to spend a lot of time studying Job. I mean, that's just the practical. It's just the way it is, right? And so I think it also wouldn't have that much meaning if you're young and haven't really personally had any suffering or difficulty. You probably wouldn't really get all the issues there. All right, so let's read that beautiful statement again. I've heard many things like these. Miserable comforters, are you all? Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing? I also could speak like you if you were in my place. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you, but my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief. Yet, if I speak, my pain is not relieved. If I refrain, it does not go away. Surely, O God, you have worn me out. You've devastated my entire household. You bound me, and it has become a witness. My gauntness rises up and testifies against me. God assails me and tears me in his anger and gnashes his teeth at me. My opponent fastens on me his piercing eyes. Men open their mouths to jeer at me. Again, speaking against his friends. They strike my cheek in scorn, unite together against me. God has turned me over to evil men and thrown me into the clutches of the wicked. All was well with me, but he shattered me. He seized me by the neck and crushed me. He has made me his target. His archers surround me. Without pity, he pierces my kidneys and spills my gall on the ground. Both of those are bad things, by the way. Again, he bursts upon me. He rushes at me like a warrior. I've sewed sackcloth over my skin, and buried my brow in the dust. My face is red with weeping. Deep shadows ring my eyes. And it goes on. I'll stop there. Just say, what he's saying is, again, I'm worn out on my friends. You're not helping me at all. And I do feel like God has somehow, turned his back on me. And so he's still in that lament phase too, although he's making a little progress. And then I think verse 22, 16:22. Only a few years will pass before I go on the journey of no return, so when he would die. My spirit is broken, my days are cut short, the grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me. My eyes must dwell in their hostility. Give me, O God, the pledge you demand. What else will put up security for me? So he's still saying, God, please tell me what I got to do. Yeah, tell me what is the right thing to do. And I think, to me, in terms of the perspective on suffering, that I think we should have, that things will happen negatively on earth. One reason, as I've said a few times, many times before, we wouldn't yearn for heaven if earth were perfect. And I think there's a reason that we need to yearn for heaven, for the literal presence of God. I mean, we have the literal presence of God, but being able to be with God in heaven in all his glory and God to be the light. And, that's very different than just having God with us, because we still have the human side of that too, and we still have Satan influencing us. And so I think he wants to have a specific answer of what to do to get this to go away. I think that's a very human thing. I think anybody who has a physical, emotional, spiritual battle going on, we would love to have a direct, clear answer on what to do to make it go away. And many times that answer is just simply, hey, God's in charge, and we can be faithful in our journey. And that's what he's beginning to understand. So give me, O God, and the pledge you demand, at verse 3. Then verse 4, you've closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. If a man denounces his friends for reward, the eyes of his children will fail. God has made me a byword to everyone, a man in whose face people spit. My eyes have grown dim with grief, my whole frame is but shadow. So he still is, he's just saying his friends aren't any better off for accusing him, but he's just tired of it. He's just kind of done. Yes?
So I think there's a whole conversation there for us on how to minister to people who are in a place that we cannot understand.
Definitely.
But beyond that, I think in Job's case, God needed his friends to turn on him, forsake him, to continue to strip him down, to get him through this journey to where there was no one but God.
Absolutely, and that is the answer. No one but God can give the ultimate relief. Absolutely, very well said. And we talked a couple of weeks ago or last week, somewhere in there, about how we don't really deal well with people in grief as a human group. And I think that's really true too of even disease. If you hear, about somebody being sick, very often what I hear from people is frequently, well, didn't they know this would happen? And, it's kind of one of those crazy things where that's like the complete lack of compassion. Even if let's say somebody's dying of liver failure because they're a chronic alcoholic, and, the answer to that isn't, oh, well, surely he knew he was going to kill his liver and die of cirrhosis. The answer is, he's a created soul of God, and we want to make sure he's right with God. And I think it's shocking to me how often I'll see a family member, usually spouses, but a family member with a family member who's got something. Seemingly to me, in my office at least, the most frequent tends to be heart disease. That if somebody comes, has been shown to have heart disease and they've either had a heart attack or they need a stent or they need a bypass surgery or they're going to be on maximum medication because they aren't candidates for surgery or whatever, almost always that family member, whether it's a spouse or a daughter or a son or a cousin, will say, well, I've told you for years you need to eat better. And I'll think, what is that? What good does that do? Let's move forward with what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And, it's a reminder of the frailty of life, and therefore it should be a reminder of the permanence of the soul. And I think that's where the focus should be. And what the friends here, to Shirley's point, were saying is that, they were all kind of saying, hey, if you just turn this switch, it'll be okay. And what God's emphasizing is through this lesson to him is that God's in charge. So let's look down at, let's go to chapter 18. Bildad, now time for his second little talk, replied, when will you end these speeches? Be sensible and then we can talk. So after Job had said, hey, I'm really tired of what you're saying, he kind of comes in and says, hey, quit talking so that we can administer our wisdom to you. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing too, because I do think as human beings, we always want to kind of have something solved for somebody else. Much easier to fix something for somebody else than in yourself. And it's really easy to want to share that wisdom and be the one who fixes things and maybe not necessarily even know the consequence to that. But it's really it's an ego issue, I think, of, well, I've got the solution. And, and failing to look in the mirror and see what's really going on with himself. And so that's why essentially Bildad is saying is be sensible and we can talk. Why are we regarded as cattle and considered stupid in your sight? So he took the insult. He ate it and digested it, and now he's replying. So you tear yourself to pieces in your anger. Is the earth to be abandoned for your sake? So it's kind of saying, hey, are you the only one that would matter? Or must rocks be moved from their places? Let's go down to the end of his comments. Verse 20, men of the west are appalled at his fate. Men of the east are seized with horror. Surely such is the dwelling of an evil man. Such is the place of one who knows not God. So he's, without directly saying, Job, you're evil. Job, you'll know God. He's saying, hey, you got to wake up to what's going on because, well, kind of you're evil and kind of you don't know God. And so without really being too direct, but he's saying that. So Job replied, how long will you torment me, this 19:2? How long will you torment me and crush me with words? 10 times now you've reproached me. Shamelessly you attack me. That 10 times, not literal. Don't go back, try count. It's sort of that, saying, oh, it'd be 100 times better if we just do this. It's not something you measure. It's just it's the hyperbole of it. So if it is true that I've gone astray, my error remains my concern alone. If you indeed would exalt yourselves above me and use my humiliation against me, then know that God has wronged me and drawn his net around me. Though I cry, I've been wronged, I get no response. Though I call for help, there's no justice. He has blocked my way so I cannot pass. He has shrouded my path in darkness, and so on. Verse 13, he has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me as a stranger. They look at me as an alien. I summon my servant. He is an answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth, my breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my brothers. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. I'm nothing but skin and bones. I've escaped with only the skin of my teeth, which were right there with his bad breath. And so this was before toothpaste, I believe. in the scheme of things. But anyway, you get the point. What he's basically, again saying is, hey, argue with me all you want, but here's the problem, is that you haven't offered me anything helpful. You've only offered me accusation. And that's doing me no good. That's what we're talking about with lack of compassion toward those suffering is it doesn't do any good to have lack of compassion. You just need to be there for somebody. And I think that's really critical. So let's see. Let's go down Zophar's comments in chapter 20. We are making progress today. It's pretty amazing. Zophar the Naamathite replied, let me go back to the end of Job's comments at 19:28. If you say, how will we hound him, since the root of the trouble lies in him, you should fear the sword yourselves. For wrath will bring punishment by the sword, then you'll know that there is judgment. So, again, he's just saying, hey, you're not suffering. Why are you telling me how to fix my suffering? Because you're not the one suffering. I'm the one suffering. You don't get it. So then Zophar, chapter 20, verse 2, my troubled thoughts prompt me to answer because I'm greatly disturbed. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. Surely you know how it has been from of old, ever since man was placed on the earth, that the mirth of the wicked is brief, the joy of the godless lasts but a moment. Though his pride reaches to the heavens, his head touches a cloud, he will perish forever, like his own dung. Those who have seen him will say, where is he? They don't pull back on comments, Like a dream he flies away, no more be found, banished like a vision of the night. Let's go down 15. He'll spit out the riches he swallowed. God will make his stomach vomit them up. He'll suck the poisonous serpents. The fangs of the adder will kill him. He won't enjoy streams, the rivers flowing with honey and cream. What he toiled for he must give back uneaten. Will he not enjoy the profit from his trading? It's interesting that, this argument is that if somebody doesn't turn back to God and just has their own pride, that they're destined for eternal suffering, although he's not saying eternal, but that's the implication, is he'll get through life and then have nothing left. He'll throw up his wealth and everything will pass. And I've often found it interesting, if you look at history, how many of the wealthiest individuals in society, especially in American society, like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, all these tycoons, I guess is what we used to call them a lot. I don't hear that term much anymore. But it's amazing how often that toward the end of their life, they suddenly want to give something back and realize, they establish a library or they put money in a museum or they, give something to somebody in society. They'll kind of try to pay back for the fact that they've essentially run over people for years and amassed their fortune. Because I think as people's lives, as the life comes near an end, whether you know it or not, because clearly we all know the specific end of our life. But as you get closer, I think you do start to think more about the nature of your relationship with God or your relationship with what you have. Will that wealth help you at all? And it won't. So I think that's a pretty interesting thing we can see in our society even today. Let's go down to, verse 27. This is still Zophar speaking. The heavens will expose his guilt. The earth will rise up against him. A flood will carry off his house, rushing waters in the day of God's wrath. Such is the fate God allots the wicked, the heritage appointed for them by God. So he's saying essentially that if you think you have it good, watch out because God's going to take it. A little bit of a mix-up theology there, and again, I'll just specify that I don't think Zophar was, he probably worshiped somebody other than Yahweh. He was of a different religious group, being a Naamathite. And so I don't think he really knew the real nature of God and the nature of grace and forgiveness and of comfort and of peace as we learn about the character of God. So Job replied, chapter 21, listen carefully, my words. Let this be the consolation you give me. Bear with me while I speak, and after I've spoken, mock on. That's sort of an interesting phrase too, isn't it? Well, mock on, guys. Is my complaint directed to man? Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and you'll be astonished. Clap your hand over your mouth. So be quiet. Just see what's going on. When I think about this, I'm terrified. Trembling seizes my body. Why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe, free from fear. The rod of God is not upon them. Their bulls never fail to breed. Their cows calve and do not miscarry. They send forth their children as a flock. Their little ones dance about. They sing to the music of the tambourine and harp. They make merry to the sound of the flute. They spend the years in prosperity, go down to the grave in peace. Yet they say to God, leave us alone. We have no desire to know your ways. And so here he's making the standard argument of why is somebody else more blessed than me? If I'm the righteous one, why would somebody else be more materially blessed? And I think it is, we know, the nature of what Satan does to try to influence people is that I think Satan can give wealth. Satan tried to give wealth to Jesus. When he took him up to the pinnacle of the temple, said, look out here and see the nations of the earth, the nations of the world, and I'll give them all to you if you'll just follow me. And of course, Jesus properly disputed that. But I think it's interesting. Here he even says, they have no desire to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? Now I'm at verse 15 of 21. What would we gain by praying to him? But their prosperity is not in their own hands. So I stand aloof from the counsel of the wicked. And so remember, this is Job's response, that the argument of, hey, even the rich will kind of come to know God because they'll realize everything will waste away. And Job's essentially saying, we worry about, we cause ourselves grief over the fact some people don't seem to have any worries, but then they don't know God. So they probably really should be worried. So let's look at verse 22. Can anyone teach knowledge to God, since he judges even the highest? So no one knows more than God, clearly. One man dies in full vigor, completely secured at ease, his body well nourished, his bones rich with marrow. Another man dies in the bitterness of soul, never having enjoyed anything good. Side by side they lay in the dust, and worms cover them both. There again, death comes. We all have a death sentence. I think that's a pretty clear issue that we all know. At some point we'll die, and then what we have then is the eternal side of God's gift to us, or the eternal punishment because of our failure to acknowledge God's gift to us. And so let's look at verse 34. So how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehood. So he's really directly accusing his friends of giving him poor theology, false theology. So then Eliphaz, we're out of time. We better stop there. We'll stop at 22:1. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was 11:30. My alarm must have gone off. Just kidding, I would never set one. We'll start at chapter 22 next time. And I want you to go ahead and read, if you have a chance, please go ahead and read all this, because I think it is important to read the whole book, but we're just not going to be going verse by verse from here. So, as exhibited today. But thank you for listening so nicely, and always enjoy the chance to teach, present thoughts, and I hope that gets us to thinking about the nature of God and the nature of our life in relation to God. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for your mercy and grace, and we thank you so much for being in control, being in charge, being our creator, our maker, our very sustenance, and also through Christ being our Redeemer, and through the Holy Spirit being our encouragement and our dwelling place for you. And we just can't understand your greatness. And reading things like Job's progression through his arguments with you helps me to realize that we really try to figure you out, and we just need to realize that you are just in charge and great and wonderful, and and the sustainer of all things. We praise you. We pray that we'll serve you in a real, meaningful way, and that we'll always be gracious for the gift you've given us through the blood of Christ, and be grateful for that blood of Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.